Hi everyone, welcome for this new video. Today we are going to listen to Cooney. She's professor of ancient Egyptian art and architecture. She's also the chair of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. And today she is talking about the 21st dynasty, third intermediate period, and hold on to your seats because it is amazing. If you like the video, please subscribe and hit that like button. Let's go. Hello, Kara.
Hello.
Thank you for being here with us today.
It is my pleasure.
From California. Are you in you're in California right now?
Yes, I just rolled out of bed, as you can see. and I
because it's 9 a.m. for you.
Yes. 9 a.m. for me, and I often start my day with an interview or a Zoom or something like that. So it seems to put me on the right course for the day.
Are you going to the university afterwards, or is it closed? Maybe I'm not really sure how it is in the US.
It's not closed. We just have to wear masks, and in the US it is different from state to state. We are a collection of states with very different opinions about how things should be done. But in California, it is we are masked, and numbers are going back up. So we will see. I have Moderna, so I haven't gotten boosted yet. My doctor told me to wait because
the third dose, right? Yes.
Moderna is a stronger vaccine. Yeah.
But you'll be in the uni later on, right?
I'll be where?
At the university. Sorry.
Oh yes. Uni. Yes. It depends. Some days I'm there and some days I'm not, and I have so many Zoom things. It's now created a schedule in which it's very difficult for me to figure out where I need to be. And I had a university meeting via Zoom and with Berkeley, and then I had a university meeting in person, and I couldn't make the in-person one. So
it never stops.
I can't figure out now how to organize my life with Zoom never going away from my life.
Well, at least you're there for the right reason, which means to enlighten us about the 21st dynasty.
Yes.
What is it? When does it happen in terms of dates, and where in Egypt?
Yeah, I try to avoid absolute dates normally and just go with centuries because these dates can so easily change and they don't really get more precise until what we call the late period. But
people don't really know exactly.
But like 11th century to the 9th century, or sorry, that's the entire third intermediate period. So 11th century to 10th century is the 21st dynasty, and the 21st dynasty, we're following Manetho's history, who gives us the 30 dynasties, and this is what occurs immediately after the end of the New Kingdom and the so-called Bronze Age collapse, and the fall of Ramses XI, and then you get Egypt split up into a number of different parts. You have a king in the north at Tanis, and you have a king at the south at Thebes. And some people say, well, we shouldn't call him a king. Well, they called themselves kings much of the time. And so that is what I follow as well. And it's not unusual to have a divided Egypt during an intermediate period, what Egyptologists call an intermediate period.
So what is the context? Because intermediate period are periods where it's unstable. How did we go from a very important, great New Kingdom to this intermediate period? What happens?
No, I love studying intermediate periods because it's a way of avoiding the spin and obfuscation of the kings who tell us that everything's fine, everything's great, everything's fine. But in the intermediate periods, you can see so much more of human ingenuity, daily life, adaptations, the kinds of things that people are willing to discard and the things that they need to keep going. And so I would say that the 21st dynasty hit different people differently. And if you look at the work of Martin Ravin, for example, who's working at the Saqqara graveyards and looking at elite tombs, he has deduced that elites were decimated in the north and that there was an entire elite replacement. And it's a wonder to me that the 21st dynasty kingship held on at all. But of course, that 21st dynasty kingship is Libyan, however you define that. And to me, Libyan is very confusing, very problematic, because we don't even know what it means to be Libyan. And many of these Libyan tribes are associated with sea peoples. And I find it confusing that Egyptologists separate the sea peoples up between Libyans and then the regular sea peoples like the Sheridan and the Peliset. They put the Libu and the Meshwesh in a different category, even though their appearance as early as the 18th dynasty seems to suggest they were part of this larger migration movement. And so you'll read in the literature, the Egyptological literature, a coalition of sea peoples and Libyans. Well, I'm starting to wonder if they're not all sea peoples, and that what we see in the 21st dynasty is a takeover by kings and generals and mercenaries who are a part of this sea people's migration, moving many of the old elites to the side and taking over systems of government. That process was much more blatant and obvious in the north, and you can see it in the necropolis at Saqqara, the necropolis of Memphis. It's the old Theban patricians seem to have held on a little bit better in the south, but they're still infiltrated with men with names like Massa Harta. Clearly a name that is not a traditional Egyptian name with a syllabic spelling. So there's a lot of interesting social change, but in Thebes, at least, there is an attempt to try to make Egypt great again. And I am saying that purposefully politically, because that's the intention, to hold on to these old ways and to include very old streams of knowledge, restricted knowledge that only very few people would know. So it's a big topic, but yeah.
Is there a moment in the previous dynasty or king, when did that happen? When this change happened?
There's no one moment, and it's interesting that you ask that, because what you see is a series of moments. You'll see as early, in my opinion, as the reign of Ramses III. You have many moments. You have moments of strike against Ramses III, which suggests that there's an inability to make payment to state workers. You have moments of resistance by elites of Thebes by killing the king himself. And we now know that Ramses III had his throat cut all the way back to his vertebrae. So these conspiracy documents that we have now preserved in Torino tell us a lot about resistance against kingship and competition therein. That's mid 20th dynasty. And then as things go on, you get possibly, if you're reading the histories, and there's lots of disagreement about this, but you may actually get kings ruling at the same time. It has been suggested that Ramses XI and Ramses IX ruled concurrently. We also see evidence of what seems to be a civil war. The king's son of Kush, Panexi, using his southern money and troops to compete with the king directly. And then when Panexi is defeated and there seems to be some sort of a diplomatic agreement about how to move forward, there is something called a Wechem Mesut, a repeating of births, which is a way of dating texts. And that happens in the reign of Ramses XI. And you see new powers coming to the fore, particularly the high priesthood of Amun, naming itself with power in a way that it had never done before. And then when Ramses XI is gone, you see an agreement to share power between Nesi-Banebjed in the north and Piank and Herihor in the south. And the chronologies here get super confusing, and there's still disagreement about who was first, Herihor or Piank. I generally go with Herihor Piank being first, and then Herihor being second. But people will continue to argue about these things. There's no one moment. There's many moments, and as with collapse, it's usually a slow whimper of time rather than one cataclysmic moment. But yeah, and of course, the Sea People's invasions against Ramses III are not an easy thing to repel, and those mass migrations have been going on since the 19th dynasty, and that's part of it as well. Yeah.
Right. And so we have a golden age in terms of arts as well during the New Kingdom. What happens in that area when we shift gradually?
It's an interesting question to ask, to say that one age is a golden age and one age is not. I agree.
I did not say it's not, though. I asked.
No. Well, yeah, it's true, but I would agree with you on the face of things, and I see no problem with. I don't need to try to defend and protect art that is mostly reused, and working with streams that are trying to repeat often what has come before, but it's not derivative completely. There are real sparks of innovation and adaptation that are really interesting, but you do see that art is not being made from whole cloth. You see art is being made using what is available and using things that people know are respected, like the face of Ramses II. Even the name of Ramses II is repeated and repeated all throughout Dynasty 20. In short, I would say the third intermediate period begins with Dynasty 20. Right. But because these kings are all named Ramses, and because they spin their stories so well and make it seem as if the Ramessid period is continuing, it doesn't seem like the third intermediate period is there, but it is very much there. It's very much there.
Do we have certain sources, writings maybe that are witnesses, that witness actually this period, or time? Are they during the set period, or is it afterwards?
No, you have most of the sources from the 20th dynasty itself. So it's a very interesting thing that from the time period when things start to get very difficult is when people decide, oh, we're in competition with one another, I need to protect myself. That's when you see all of this documentation arising almost out of nowhere. For example, Western Thebes and the village of Deir el-Medina, you don't see these villagers making all kinds of records and receipts about work they're doing with one another, probably because they didn't need to. They weren't doing that kind of work. Whereas in the 20th dynasty, when the necropolis is being opened and people are pulling out all kinds of materials to reuse, and the craftsmen and the guards and the policemen are all working with one another to create this new economy, this new income stream, then you see letters, receipts, workshop records, legal disputes, all kinds of things are being written down. And you could argue that the same is happening at a very high level. So you see the Harris papyrus, the Wilbur papyrus, in which the Theban priesthood is recording what is theirs. This is ours, this is our land, this is our stuff, and there's inventories being made, rather defensively, one could argue, but in competition with other powers that are trying to take it or to create new taxing revenue that they didn't necessarily have before. We still don't know exactly what these things were for. But though you'll read in a book, this was for this. I don't think it's always that clear. You have the strike papyri, where people are writing down that the strikes are happening and what conclusions are. After that, you have the tomb robbery papyri that talks about crackdowns of high officials against a number of workers and people and craftsmen and guards in Western Thebes, and how they interrogated them, tortured them, found the things that they had done wrong, and tried to make amends of this situation, put things right. And then you have a little before this, you have the Harem conspiracy documents, the judicial papyri from Turin. And you're actually writing down, you're not writing down directly the king has been killed, but you're writing down almost everything but, you don't say the king has been killed, but then you say who the parties involved are, what their methods of working with one another were. And there's a list of dozens of people who have been accused of harming the king, women, men, officials. And it's a time period of wondrous documentation right before the fall. And then when you get into true Dynasty 21, it's gone. Right. You don't have any more. You don't have any more of this wonderfully juicy documentation.
Yeah, it's like there is a proper conscious from the people that some things are changing, which we don't really have for the previous intermediate period. From what I remember, it's more there are less people and more official sources before. No proper people, witnesses and sources that say, okay, we're the people, we're doing this, so we are witness to this change.
Yeah, it's it's arguable. You have the Hekenocht papyri, which come from an intermediate period. You have Mary Carré. Maybe that instruction was written down during an intermediate period. Maybe that's too on the nose to say that it was. it's an interesting thing that one could examine documentation in Egypt and see a massive documentation at the moment running into the collapse, however you want to define collapse of government and social systems. And it's never complete. They always maintain some sort of some of their system. And it's not like the 21st dynasty, there's nothing there. There's all kinds of religious texts and oracle texts and things that are cloaked in a very heady ideology, so that it's often hard to see what's actually happening, but there are texts there. And so you can look at the oracle of, or the ritual of Nessie Khonsu, in which she is encircled and divinized, and there's an Amen hymn there. So you can look at something like that circumstantially, that papyrus, and try to understand, well, why are they divinizing this person? Why does she need to be divinized? What does this mean? And there are all kinds of texts that are graffiti that are scratched into the walls of Khonsu Temple. Are they graffiti? Are they considered formal documents? How are we to understand them? So there are all kinds of texts, but it seems that the Thebans shift very quickly from a just the facts bureaucracy sort of system into something where religion is cloaking everything. And Egyptologists have called this time period a theocracy. I think it's an interesting choice of words to have the priests ruling things. Once the priests end up being generals and kings simultaneous to being priests, it does seem that the documentation is more cloaked in religious discourse, such that it is difficult for us to see what's going on.
Right. So do we have this phenomenon of, so we talk about Ramesses II, I think you said, that is mentioned over and over again, from what I remember. But do we have some kings that are actually not mentioned again ever? Well, not ever, but during the intermediate periods that are more, erased from existence?
Yeah. So I'm working on, it's funny you asked that, because I'm working on exactly this question with the royal cache coffins and bodies. And I'm working through all of the coffins that these kings were buried in, and which ones may have belonged to a king originally, like Thutmose III's or Amenhotep II's, and which kings were included with the high priesthood of Amen in their own tomb at Dir el-Bahri 320. Some were included and some were not. And many Egyptologists look at this and they say, oh, well, the choices made were based on ease of transport, or sometimes they'll say who was important. But I've just written the chapter that's pretty much saying you're in or you're out, like Heidi Klum would say, right? This idea of who the 21st dynasty high priests want to connect with and whom they want to exclude. And I think some of these are surprising and some are not. But we can see with our own eyes, going to the Cairo Museum, though all of these have been moved to Nemek now, that the earlier kings are, the founders of things are more honored than the endings of things. Ramses IX is an exception. Ramses IX is included in the Dir el-Bahri 320 cache, which is weird. And you go, well, what was it with this Ramses IX? Something is going on that we don't understand. And we all love to know that maybe he's a Theban in competition with Ramses XI, who's a northerner. But it's unclear. And so you have Ahmose, second Enre Tau, all of these guys and their queens deposited into Dir el-Bahri 320, almost certainly displayed in some sense to their closed society to show that those kings respected and honored their own rule. And Thutmose III, I mean, he seems to be Amenhotep I. Those seem to be the god kings par excellence to really link yourselves to. And those are, I would argue, displayed and connected to the high priesthood in a very oracular way, a way of claiming the bodies and thus claiming the kingship, claiming the power, almost a consecration from these ancient kings, whose tombs they've just opened up and recommodified, right? And for that work, you can look at Nicholas Reeves. He's published a lot on this. John Taylor as well. Carl Janssen Winkeln. There's lots of work that's done on this idea that the Valley of the Kings was not piously protected by the 21st dynasty high priest, but actually new income was created out of it. And then they created the pious story that they needed to manufacture. Very cleverly done.
So you were talking about the coffins, and I think we're going to end with this because you released. I'm sorry, I'm trying to change that. So you released in 2 books this year. One in. Here we go. So we're talking about Coffin, sorry. And so the one that is called Coffin, Commerce, How Funerary Materiality Formed Ancient Egypt in May of this year. And so we're talking about coffins. Can you just quickly tell us what you are saying in this book very quickly, why you decided to write a book on coffins, which can be surprising topics in general. Why coffins?
In particular?
Yeah, I'll start there. I was like 6 years ago as a part of a dissertation defense, and at UCLA the way the defenses work is there's 4 or 5 professors, and they all work with the student and ask questions and try to get the student to explain why they're working on what they're working on. And this particular student was working on coffins, and one of the professors said, not more coffins, I'm so annoyed about these coffins. And it would be like saying to a class that says, not another Greek vase. What's with these vases? Which you can't do. These coffins are an excellent mechanism of understanding social history. They are gendered. They are stylistically dated. Sometimes they're actually dated with real names, though often not. They have the names of the deceased, sometimes family members. They show spending abilities. They show whether or not there's reuse and crisis happening. And they show restricted knowledge. And if there's an innovative display of that restricted knowledge on a coffin. Inside of the coffin, you have mummies that can show innovations in mummification that is very interesting. The innovation of mummification in the 21st dynasty is insane. You look at these mummies with inlaid glass eyes and false hair and stuffing of their bodies, and it's shocking to see one of these mummies up close. And the 21st dynasty, I argue in other places, we're creating this mummification because of all of the reuse of the coffin. So if a coffin is going to be taken from your body, then there is an interest in making it such that the body can act like its own coffin without the coffin. So you stuff in sawdust and you create an image with open eyes, not closed, like the coffin. And so there's all kinds of things that one can say with coffins, and I use coffins to tell a social history and an economic history. And so that's what the book Coffin Commerce is about. And it's tracking a diachronic story. So I'm starting with Dynasty 19 and going to Dynasty 21. It's a short book, meant to be a short book. And they made me cut out. That's why it's supposed to be short. So I took a bunch of it. I'm like, fine, I'll put it in the other book that I'm writing. But I'm trying to tell a story of a coffin from beginning to end, if you like, how the coffin is commissioned, who would have ordered it, who then makes it, how they make it, what the different methodologies of making it are, why it was made, how it was displayed. And then I talk briefly about reuse and its display in a museum context. But the book I'm working on now is all about the coffin reuse in particular.
All right. And I strongly suggest you get to go and read this book. I will put the link in the description below. I think we're good. Thank you very much, Cara, for taking your time, precious time to talk with us today. It was fantastic. I've learned a lot, so I think they actually have learned a lot as well.
Thank you for having me on.